Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Not too long ago, I found myself in an elevator. Not this elevator. Uh, Actually, we'll come back to this one later. Oh, um, not this elevator either. Here we go. This elevator. I actually find myself in elevators quite often. Um, in general, I think a lot of us social engineers, especially those of us who do physicals, find ourselves in elevators quite often. Elevators and bathrooms and stairwells and all sorts of places that we can duck into and hide on a regular basis. Places like elevator lobbies, for example. In this case, in this engagement, we found ourselves in elevators rather often. And in this particular engagement, we made our way through the lobby into the elevator and up to a second or third floor elevator lobby, where we proceeded to try to make our way into the suite of an office building that we had been challenged to break into using some social engineering and some physical bypass and covert tactics using a little bit of red team stealth and some badge cloning. And in this case, we weren't really trying to use tools, but rather some social engineering skills. So as we made our way through the elevator lobby, we knew that we were going to have to do some slick talking to get past the next layer of defense, which was, in fact, a reception person and a series of glass walls and doors with badge readers on them. And as we went through to the reception area, we noticed that we were confronted by a pretty formidable force, a human person in charge of assessing whether or not we were supposed to be there. And this person immediately called someone down to assess whether or not we were authorized to be there. And at this point, we determined we were probably going to find ourselves in a little bit of a pickle. This person that they called in to assess whether or not we were actually supposed to be there started asking some challenging questions. And it was at that point that we discovered we were probably cooked. I'm a liar. I'm pretty good at it, and I get paid to lie, and I love it. But this guy wasn't buying it. I was trying to figure out in real time whether or not he knew what was going on, if he was in on it. Did he tell someone? Did somebody sell me out? How did he know what was going on? Was that smirk he was trying to conceal telling of whether or not he knew that this was a red team? It was pretty unclear what was going on, but there was definitely a demeanor of hostility, a little bit of disgust. And it seemed like he knew that something was up, whether or not he was just suspicious of us in general, or he was aware for some other reason we'd been detected during our hostile surveillance or hostile planning that something was going on. And so at this point, we knew we were in a pretty challenging situation. This is Epic Fails and Heist Tales, red teaming toward truly tested security. My name is Alethe Denis, and I'm a senior security consultant here on the red team at Bishop Fox. I'm probably most well known for winning a competition at DEF CON and being awarded a black badge as a result of that, a seat in the Black Badge Hall of Fame at DEF CON, as well as some various features in media and a feature in a Darknet Diaries episode. Out of that opportunity and the Darknet Diaries episode, I've had some incredible experiences, including an opportunity to train military personnel and special operations people at the fort, formerly and soon to be known again as Fort Bragg. I've also more recently had an opportunity to go to Los Alamos National Laboratory and present to students and staff there on social engineering and the stories that I'm going to share with you today. They were actually the first to vet those stories for you and hear them for the first time. Despite all the paperwork that they made me go through in order to visit that facility, they did not let me pet the nukes. Very disappointing. There are always NDAs and confidential aspects to the projects that we do here at Bishop Fox. And so, to protect our clients, their people, their information, and sensitive matters, there are some elements of these stories that have to be obfuscated and redacted. But I will do my absolute best to share with you all the juicy details. The agenda for today, we're going to talk about the one with the surveillance site survey. We'll then talk about red team packing and pretexting. We'll also talk about red team physical penetration tests in general, and the one with the dumpster diving loot, and finally, red team outcomes. First up, red team physical penetration tests, and the one with the surveillance site survey. So where was I? I was just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to let her in so she could pwn his network. In this situation, we had a reception person who had called in reinforcements, and we had someone who was scrutinizing our pretext pretty heavily. And at this point, I figured we were pretty well cooked. It was clear to me that this person wasn't buying anything that we were selling. And I think it's important that we go back and figure out how we got into this predicament. So first things first, we at Bishop Fox here, our red team was hired by this client, a technology and software development company, to test their office suite in a social engineering focused red team where the physical vector was in scope, meaning we are going to try to access their network, but we have the opportunity to go on site and try to do that using the physical realm. We aren't purely limited to doing this remotely. And so to do that, we're going to try to gain access to a suite within a multi-tenant building. And that test is limited, however, to doing so during their office hours. And we can scan and clone badges of office employees and try to use those clone badges to gain access to the office suite. We're also allowed to use physical bypass tools to gain entry into this suite, meaning essentially we can burgle the place without, causing any damages to the physical building. And of course, within reason, if the opportunity presents itself. I always try to focus first on the social engineering, and opportunistically, if we can covertly bypass something using physical bypass tools, great. But my goal is always to test the people, the processes, and the procedures first. This is also a client that wanted us to focus on that human element. And the goal, the end trophy, was for us to install a malicious device on their network within that office suite in an area that was typically limited to the office personnel and employees only. Here is a lay of the land. This client had a series of buildings on an office campus. This is a pretty nice campus, honestly. They had one building that was multiple levels, a very busy parkway on one side, a bustling parking lot, several other buildings on the campus, one of which had a cafeteria that was pretty much open to all. They assumed anyone that came in there was an employee of one of the buildings, and anyone could walk into this cafeteria and purchase food and sit down and have lunch. They also had a front door that faced sort of the main driveway into the office campus. And they had a side door and a back door near a parking lot area that we were unsure exactly where those led originally, but then following some hostile surveillance where we camped out and tried to blend in and did some observations to learn more about their security staff, their shifts, how employees operate in the area, what they wore, what their times that their schedules started and ended, and lunch breaks and things like that. We also learned that they had HID multi-class RFID readers on the doors on the exterior of the building, and that there were security guards that were there during the day. During our surveillance, we also learned that there were some pretty significant gaps between the doors on the side of the building where we thought we could use some physical bypass tools to gain entry into this side lobby. And at one point, we tested this theory and found that we were able to exploit the gap in the door by inserting what's called a double door tool through the gap and then depressing this crash bar to then pull the door out towards us and then gain entry into this side lobby, which led into a stairwell. Inside of the stairwell, we noticed that there were no surveillance cameras. This stairwell not only had no surveillance cameras, but it had doors that went directly into the suites. And we thought if we could gain access through these doors directly into the suites, then we could bypass the people altogether. So we did attempt to gain access into these suite areas through these doors, but we came up empty. They had bad readers, but they were also not easily bypassed by our covert entry tools, which was somewhat disappointing, but it also made this engagement more challenging, meaning we were going to have to go through the humans to get to this office suite and try to achieve our goal. Here's an example of one of the doors that went into the suite. It was definitely protected by a badge reader, and despite our best efforts with the under the door tool and even some camera equipment to go under the door and shims, we were not successful in trying to bypass these doors to get directly into the suite. So after loitering in the cafeteria, we used some badge cloning scanning devices to scan for employee badges with people that were in the cafeteria, because let's face it, it's a little awkward to chase people around a parking lot with an antenna the size of a suitcase. And we managed to stand in line next to people and sit near enough to folks where we were able to scan a number of badges over the course of a couple days, and then clone those badges into our own badges that we plan to use for a pretext that we created to use to attempt to gain access to this suite. On the morning that we attempted to gain access to the building, we noted that the security guard that we noticed had showed up for his shift was not at the desk. So we attempted to gain entry dressed as IT workers, but managed to slip by the security desk without being noticed. We had badges that we had cloned, and we used those to access the elevator. And we went up to the floor here where we were able to deploy a very tactical post-it note to block an intercom camera that could have revealed our identities to whoever was monitoring this camera, an intercom that was used to interface with the receptionist from the door to the office suite. We considered installing the ESP key here behind the badge reader. However, this building was very new. The cabling and everything was perfectly intact, and we didn't want to cause anything that would be destructive or permanent damage to the building. So we opted not to do this, but for the sake of demonstration, we showed that this was something that we could deploy here behind the badge reader to collect more badge data from employees. And so once we've done this, we attempted to bypass the door here to the suite. We're not successful there. So we decided we would come back when there were employees in the suite and then attempt to gain access to this office then. Coming back later in the day, we then went through this elevator once more. We're getting very familiar with this elevator. back into the elevator lobby, and I noticed the same door that we had been attempting to bypass earlier in the day was ajar just ever so slightly. And so, with confidence, dressed up as IT workers and with metal clipboards and um, some other accessories to help to support our pretext, we presented ourselves as IT workers who were there to put together an estimate for an updated surveillance camera system. This was a pretext that I came up with and that we decided to use so that we could pose as potential vendors, not current vendors, which would make it more difficult for a reception person to verify whether or not we were supposed to be there, since we were still in the audition phase of becoming a vendor rather than an existing vendor. This was a pretext that I thought would go swimmingly, and it was one that we already had the backstory and the infrastructure set up to support, including a phone number with another member of our red team backstopping us. So if this person called the number, they would reach our pseudo IT company tech support and be routed to somebody who could answer questions about our phony work order and any other details regarding this dispatch. We had polo shirts with logos emblazoned on them, and everything looked super legit. Once we came into the lobby, though, we were confronted with this person at reception who was very diligent and asked if we were there to meet somebody. And at this point, we thought, yeah, no problem. We'll just present our work order and we'll be allowed past this glass door and we'll be in no problem. But at this point, she said, are you here to meet somebody? We said, no, we're just here to do a quick walkthrough. Shouldn't be any problem. Just need to take a look at the location of the existing cameras, check for any additional drops, not a big deal. And it was at that point that she began typing on her computer pretty rigorously, and she called somebody out. And that was when we began to worry. So this gentleman came out, and it was at that point that I realized that this wasn't just anyone. This was, in fact, the mark. This was the person that I had determined was the ideal person whose authority we should use to influence the reception person to allow us to complete the survey. So not only was it the person in charge of physical security, but it was the exact person whose name I'd put on the work order. So I couldn't exactly pull the work order out and present it to him because it legitimately had his name on it. So at that point, I realized we were sort of cooked, and I could tell that he knew that. And so while we were trying very gracefully to bow out of this pretty tricky situation, I was feeling, you know, things getting a little hot. And the reception person was also beginning to scrutinize every detail of how we were responding to this. We decided that instead of trying to push things further, instead of trying to, have them call our fictitious boss and try to exert their authority over the situation or escalate things further, I looked at every outcome and I just knew there was no outcome here where we were going to be allowed to complete this survey. There was no outcome where we would be concluding this with us achieving the objective of gaining access to the suite through these two individuals. It wasn't going to happen. So it was at that point that I determined that our best course of action was to blame a communication gap or the landlord of the building for ordering this and not informing them, and to try to bow out gracefully. And it was at that point that this person, thankfully, they allowed us to leave with our dignity. So there's a portion of the Queen's Gambit, and if you haven't seen this show, I do recommend you check it out because I love chess for this. There's a level of respect in chess where when you know you're outwitted or outmatched, even if you haven't made it to the point where it's check or checkmate, you resign out of respect for the level at which your opponent is playing. And at this point, I could tell I was outmatched, and it was in my best interest to resign with dignity and allow them to let us leave with some grace, and then to maintain this relationship with our client, convert this engagement to an assumed breach, and then come back and do the internal portion of the test the following day. And so, in a sign of good sportsmanship, we left. And in the end, we were able to convert it to an assumed breach. We were able to come back the following day and complete the test. And we were able to create a really great relationship with this client and actually lead to future business with the same client, and maintain a very healthy relationship with them going forward, because we chose not to create a real antagonistic relationship between our team and their defensive team during this test. So let's talk briefly about red team packing and pretexting. So you never know what you might need. I have a couple of different pieces of luggage that contain all kinds of different things. You absolutely want to make sure that you bring clothes not only for yourself, but for your characters that you're going to impersonate while you are implementing your pretext. Things like jackets, casual to formal wear, shoes that match your pretext are incredibly important, because shoes are one of the first things that people will look at when they are sizing you up. You also want to make sure that you have a variety of different outfits available and things that can help to change your appearance, like accessories, sunglasses, hats, wigs, things that you can use during your hostile surveillance and hostile planning. If you are somebody who can grow facial hair, maybe you grow facial hair prior to the engagement and then remove it prior to attempting to use your pretext and make entry into the client site, to change your appearance dramatically. If you're somebody who can wear makeup, bring makeup, use that to change your appearance. You can change your face pretty dramatically with some simple contouring tricks, and things like that. You also want to bring office supplies and things like tape, command strips, Post-it notes, all that kind of stuff for red team arts and crafts. Some of my favorite things that we've done during engagements are coming up with on-the-fly solutions to more challenging problems that we've come up against in trying to gain access to different types of buildings, doors, and rooms. You'll, of course, need all the cables. So this is where that box of cables that you have been saving for the last decade really comes in handy. Battery packs, your badge scanning and cloning equipment, your breach tools, including can of air, under the door tool, hand warmer, wire coat hangers. You can get these from dry cleaners pretty inexpensively. Even with your last set of dry cleaning, hang on to those, because they do come in handy, and we've had to stop at dry cleaners while we're out traveling and get those sometimes. Shims, your lock picking tools, of course, but also think about props that you can use to make your pretext more believable. Things like metal clipboards that have storage in them can be incredibly helpful, to not only make your pretext believable, but also to store your malicious devices and implants, and sneak them in, to wherever you're trying to gain access. Also, any equipment that would be relevant to your pretext, like bags with tools or installation devices, ladders, if that's something that you're going to be bold enough to carry with you. A ladder can get you into some, most anywhere, frankly, if we're being honest. You'll want to have a badge holder if you're creating a badge or an employee badge that you want to use to make your pretext look more valid. And then perhaps some conversation starters. There's two ways that you can go about creating a pretext. During hostile surveillance, typically you want to blend in. But sometimes standing out is actually the best way to blend in. You look less suspicious if you're very overt in the way that you dress or the way that you conduct yourself. And some great examples of that are season 1, episode 1 of Alias, where she's got the very bold wig with the gum and the very exuberant personality. She blends right in and makes it right through the scrutiny of the people at the airport because she's just so bold and out there. Another good thing to bring is some tools that can help you reduce your anxiety, especially when I'm trying to make entry into somewhere where I'm a little anxious. I will bring gum just to help me kind of like use it as a stress ball. It's a little annoying when I have to review the footage afterward, but the gum can kind of help me channel my anxiety into something other than, picking at my nails or something that's a little more visually annoying to other people or can give me away as being anxious. This is what the toolkit looks like toward the end of the engagement. It's a little bit of a wreck, but these are actually components of the toolkit. Some other ways that you can trick request to exit sensors, in addition to the can of air, which you see there at the top, is the wire coat hanger with a hand warmer. Sometimes the change in temperature can trick the request to exit sensors on doors. I also bring lollipops for the same reasons I bring gum. There's, of course, all the office supplies, Post-it notes, index cards, things like that. They can come in handy, especially if you want to label a device that you're trying to implant somewhere. Bringing Sharpies and things like that can also be helpful. Depending on your pretext, you may want to swap your actual rings out for silicone bands. This was actually a suggestion that I got from the gentleman who blocked me on the first story. So now I have a selection of those silicone wedding bands in my toolkit, along with various types of tape, gaffer's tape, duct tape, clear tape, scotch tape. You never know what you're going to need. Whiteout, all kinds of different badges and things that we can use for various pretexts, and just a variety of cables and other nonsense to help us when we're attempting to install various devices and make sure that they have power and that they connect to the right things. So red team arts and crafts, these usually happen in hardware stores, hotel rooms, hotel lobbies, cars. So making sure that you can bring all the necessary tools with you, and that you're game for being creative and doing so on the fly, because you're usually not in your home area when you're doing these engagements, is something that is also super important. A variety of different outfits and companies that you can create and maintain a backstop for is also important. We have a few different vendor type companies that we maintain, false or fictitious companies and aliases for, so that we can implement those personalities and use those pretexts for engagements on a regular basis. And then we also have backstories and backstops for the individual alias personalities of the quote employees that we impersonate for these companies that we have and maintain. Let's talk a little bit about pretext development. So in our first example, I take full ownership for not following my own advice. I had a great idea for a pretext that was a site survey for surveillance camera system. I really liked this pretext because it has worked really well, especially as it's being presented to administrative staff in other scenarios for other clients. And I just wanted to reuse the same pretext. It was lazy of me, if I'm being honest. And I didn't do what I recommend myself to others, and that is to properly do my passive reconnaissance or OSINT and thoroughly investigate this client company first, then do my hostile surveillance, which is that in-person reconnaissance on the site of the client location, and then use that information to then craft the pretext with the information that I found about that client. I did not thoroughly investigate this client and then create the pretext out of the information that I found. Instead, I tried to take a pretext idea and then find the information later to support it, which is the opposite of what I typically recommend. And that is why I feel that we failed in that case and why we were blocked. Typically, I will do passive information gathering, then the active reconnaissance or hostile surveillance, hostile planning, and then develop the pretext using all the information that I found. And that is the best way to make sure that you have a successful outcome from a red team perspective. The most compelling pretext is going to come out of real information about that organization and verifying that you have accurate vendor and employee information to use to craft a compelling and engaging pretext. Something that is going to be believable and you have a lot less chance of being challenged. So let's talk about how clients gain the most from physical pen testing. In this case, we had a client that had hired us to test another multi-tenant building that was in a pretty affluent area in a big city. I'm trying to redact things as I go here. This particular area had a lot of high-end retail, a very strong presence of law enforcement, and a very strong presence of hired security, and everybody was carrying firearms and open carrying. So it was pretty evident that there was a lot of security and a lot of weapons around this building, not necessarily for the client, but for surrounding retail and just in general. So we also noticed that coming back from dinner one evening, that most of the organizations in this area put out their trash on a pretty nightly basis. And we thought it would be pretty cool if we could find anything in the trash of this multi-tenant building that tied back to one of the floors for our client. And so on our way back from this client or from dinner, we found there were a few bags that looked like they tied back to a floor of our client. And then we hit the jackpot. We found a bag that not only had boxes in it from the same floor, but it looked like somebody had taken an entire desk and cleaned it out. And it was like a time capsule from around the time the world ended, like 2019, 2020 timeframe. And around the time that this client had moved offices. So it had legitimately everything about an office move, all kinds of business cards, vendor relationships, sensitive documents, gifts that the person had received, cards from those gifts. So it gave us a good idea of what vendors the client administrative staff used to give gifts to employees, like flower vendors and that kind of thing. There were also various other things in the trash, but one of the things that we found was a set of Wi-Fi credentials. And this was something that sparked our interest because one of the challenges that we had for this engagement was to gain the wireless guest Wi-Fi network name and password. And the primary objective for this engagement was to install a device called a screen crab in the conference room, and then to exfiltrate images that this device would capture from the video conference equipment in the conference room out over their wireless network. And in the week leading up to this engagement, we had sent a phishing email to the staff at this client and attempted to phish the wireless password from the staff. And they'd been pretty good about forwarding this email to their IT and security teams and immediately finding us out. We did everything right. I masqueraded as the property management company. We stood up all kinds of, custom domains and email phishing infrastructure and did all the research. I posed as their actual landlord and property management companies to try to elicit this information. And they were just very good at spotting a phishing email because they knew their landlord point of contact very well and their property management company point of contact very well. And they forwarded things to the office manager, who forwarded it to the IT person, who forwarded it to the security person. And we were blocked at gaining this information via phishing. So we were pretty freaked out because we're like, these folks are really good at defending against social engineering attacks, and we need to go on site next week and conduct this physical. We're probably toast. So we'd attempted to get the Wi-Fi credentials using phishing, but now we'd found a set in the trash. But the thing was, they were from, a few years back. So we weren't sure if they were legitimate. And so instead of, taking a chance on this, we'd negotiated, since these engagements are time boxed, we usually have 5 days to complete them. And with, enough time, most attackers could do work to gain access to the interior of the building. And they had their guest wireless credentials posted all over the interior of the building. We negotiated a concession that the client would share the wireless credentials with us if we were not able to get them within the first couple days of the engagement. But I had a hunch, and so I asked the point of contact. I said, "Are these the credentials for your wireless?" And I showed them what we'd found in the trash, which they were completely and utterly flabbergasted that all of this information we found in the trash had been sitting in a bag on the curb. But they said, "No, those are not them." And I said, "Oh, okay." But I ended up putting those credentials on a red micro SD card, and I put the guest credentials that this point of contact shared with us on a green for guest micro SD card, just in case. And I left the red card in the screen crap device. And I thought, if we can use these and they work, then that creates a much more compelling narrative for the reporting, that we were able to accomplish the goal with no assistance from the client. So I prepared the screen grab. We made everything ready for our pretext, including our clothing, accessories, and the device, as well as everything else we needed. We made our way to the office building of this client in this very big city that was very well protected. And we got to the door of the suite, or the door of the building, and realized that the badges that we had cloned had been rolled, meaning those credentials in those badges no longer opened the door. So we ended up buying some time outside, pretending we were calling up to somebody to let us in. And in the meantime, somebody exited the building. They left from a food delivery or something else, and we were able to reverse tailgate into this building. And when we reverse tailgated into the building, we were then once again in an elevator lobby. So we found ourselves in this elevator, and this particular elevator also had a badge reader in it, but there was one floor that we could access without scanning a badge. And so at this point, we decided we would go to that floor, given our badges were not going to allow us to access any other floors. And so going up to this floor, we knew we were going to then again be confronted by an elevator lobby with a door that had a badge reader next to it and an intercom with a camera. And we would have to, state our business and then gain access to the suite. So we were rehearsing our story. We were going through what our pretext was. We had all of our accessories. We had our work order. Again, we were masquerading as IT people and a vendor that this company had hired. But this time our job for the day was to install a piece of equipment in their conference room. And so when we achieved access into the elevator lobby on this floor, we poked our heads out of the elevator and we realized that this door with the badged access was actually propped open. And it was at that point that I realized that we were going to be able to just walk in. And we were familiar with the layout because we found the layout to the office suite. And we were pretty confident that people would be distracted at this time of day with a meeting that was being held in the office. And so when we walked in, not knowing what we were going to find other than a security guard, we were pleasantly surprised to find this guy. And I'm not kidding. He looked exactly like this, though this is not him. He looked exactly like this. He had his feet propped up on a box. He was very relaxed. And so that is exactly how I treated the situation. I became very relaxed and I dropped my shoulders and just became very calm and very chill because I didn't want to raise any alarms. I wanted him to feel very much at ease. And as we sort of, dragged our way into the room, I just said, "Hey, we'll stay out of your hair," and kept walking. I didn't pause. I didn't skip a beat. We just walked directly into the conference room. And he said, "Well, okay," and just went back to what he was doing. And it was at that point that we were able to walk directly into the conference room and move past this guard and begin installing our malicious device, the Hack5 screen crab, behind their conference room TV and set this device up to not only take power from the TV, but to connect to their video conferencing equipment using an HDMI cable that we bought, and then sit in line between the conferencing equipment and the TV to take screenshots of everything that they shared in their meetings over the next week. And so what the screen crab did was it would take a screenshot every 10 seconds and then exfiltrate that over the wireless connection to our red team controlled C2. And with the red card, those credentials were the credentials that we found in the trash. Once this device came up and all the light statuses looked good and it connected to the network, we realized that the screen crab actually connected to a network using the credentials that we found in the trash, the same credentials that we were told were not the guest Wi-Fi network. And that's when we realized that it was actually the corporate Wi-Fi network. And that's when we realized that they had no network access control whatsoever. And we were able to connect our device using simply the network name and password, which was incredible, but also not shocking. Now, this organization is not immature by any stretch of the imagination overall, but this is something that is a known issue to their security team, we later found out. And it was something that this security person who was in charge of that area of the business really wanted us to find, which is the reason why this was the trophy and the objective in this case. There are some individuals who read where I shared about this story in the register that we were able to essentially connect to their corporate Wi-Fi using nothing more than name and password. And they compared it to me bragging about punching a toddler in the face as if I were a mugger boasting about that. And I want to stress here that in these scenarios, I'm not boasting about it merely for the sake of boasting. I share these things because this is illuminating to folks who are not in charge of security, who are not familiar with information security, and who purely look at wireless and connecting to wireless as a hassle. The people that were in charge of signing the checks at this organization, this wireless network had been set up at the very beginning of this organization's existence, and they didn't want it to be any more difficult for them to connect their own personal devices to the network. They didn't want any network access control because it would make it hard. And the security person wanted us to accomplish this so that they could demonstrate how easy it would be for attackers to connect to their network and essentially gain access to all of their company secrets. This was an objective that they wanted us to complete so that they could gain investment from the people who were in charge of making these decisions in making their network more secure. So when we are hired to accomplish these objectives, it is for a reason and with purpose. And usually there's a much deeper reason behind the objectives that are set. And sometimes we aren't even privy to those. After the engagement, I told you we get back to this elevator. We were able to make our way from the conference room back into the elevator and leave this building with a few employees that were making their way down to another floor and happily discussing sensitive details about their company and their schedule and days that they would be in the office in the future. And we decided to talk about where we were planning to go to lunch next. This was also an opportunity for us to make our way into another floor of this office by tailgating these employees as they left the elevator to go back to work from their all hands meeting on another floor and continue to attempt to meet our other objectives, which were to gain access to some of the executives' offices and plug malicious cables and devices into their own computers. So this gave us an incredible opportunity to then just follow these employees off of the elevator and into a different floor without using their any badge data. In this case, we decided not to do that. And we were able to meet the objectives of the test, which were to install this device in the conference room behind the TV. And I even installed that device with a Post-it note on it that said, conference room, do not remove, using a Post-it that I found in that bag from that cleaned out desk. So the Post-it was even one of their own Post-it notes matching the colors that they used in their office. And we were in this building for less than 10 minutes, which is pretty incredible. And we were able to do this and each of our objectives without the use of any technical device to gain access to the building, and without the use of any physical bypass tools whatsoever. So purely social engineering to gain access to the building and to gain access to the interior conference room. Of course, the screen crab is a technical device, but for the physical bypass, no tools and nothing other than social engineering was used, which was pretty compelling in the report from their perspective. So let's talk now about red team outcomes and how these types of engagements can significantly enhance security posture for our clients. Our post-engagement insight from the one with the surveillance site survey, we found they had unencrypted low frequency badge data. So we were able to clone those badges pretty easily. We had default accounts that were enabled and default keys in the badges that we were able to scan and clone. There were also door frame gaps, gaps in the double doors. There were insecure credentials, insecurely stored credentials, inconsistent security monitoring, meaning that while there was monitoring, it was inconsistent and there were not clear pathways of communication. That relates back to detection during hostile surveillance. And then there was a lack of breach and bypass response. This is while we were attempting to gain access to the doors in the stairwells and things like that. And then the surveillance dead zones, the fact that there were no cameras in the stairwells and things like that while we were conducting our initial attempts to gain access from the exterior. In the one with the dumpster diving loot, there were insufficient document destruction procedures in place. We found a lot of documents spread throughout the office that had sensitive information, but we also had all of the documents that were in the trash and accessible to us through our dumpster diving activities. And then, of course, the insecure document storage, default accounts enabled, and default keys. We were able to scan some badges and clone them. The fact that they weren't working when we attempted to use them later in the week is a plus for them, that they rolled the badge credentials, but the fact remains the same, that they had those default accounts enabled with the default keys. We were able to then clone those. They had some door frame gaps in some of the doors that we examined on the exterior of the building. They also had insecure credential storage, meaning the credentials that we were able to find in the trash and also posted in areas around the office. And then an insecure Wi-Fi network setup, meaning we were able to connect to their network, our device, without any device authentication mechanism. And then lack of bypass detection, meaning even with badged access, the elevator, exterior door, and suite all had badge scanning on them, but for whatever reason, each of those points was not secured. And then the human guard didn't enforce his authority over that choke point where he should have verified that we were in fact supposed to be there. So out of this, we can see that there are opportunities for continuous improvement for security programs out of these physical pen tests, whether the red team is successful in achieving their trophy objectives or not. Where we conduct these engagements, whether we're able to achieve the objective of the test or not, we have an opportunity to come in as an unbiased third party and a partner to our clients, not a real adversary, and take a look at our client security programs, policies, procedures, and then test the assumptions that our client organizations have that their employees are following, enforcing, and taking action to enforce those procedures and policies in reality, not just in theory. And so while some policies tend to be aspirational, and some leaders tend to make assumptions, a red team can actually show and demonstrate whether or not these protections are being implemented at the ground level, so to speak. And this is something that can help enhance incident response and detection capabilities. It can increase regulatory compliance and audit readiness. And it's something that I believe is very valuable in creating actionable insights for strategic security improvements over time. And with that, my name, of course, is Alethe, and you are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. If you have questions, feedback, comments, I would love to hear from you. LinkedIn is the best place to find me. If you're more curious about how I got into this whole mess to begin with, you can check out the Darknet Diaries episode 107 for sort of my journey into InfoSec. I'm also on the board of DEF CON groups, and you can reach out to your local DEF CON group or to the board at info@defcongroups.org if you want to find your local group to get more involved with your hacking community. And for more information on Bishop Fox, I would encourage you to review our website, bishopfox.com. And of course, you can find us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, and we have a really robust lineup of red team services, as well as other pen testing capabilities and services here at Bishop Fox. And I'd love to invite you to learn more about our products and services there. So Questions from the audience. This should be fun. Have you ever had to explain your red team toolkit to law enforcement? Curious on how those type of discussions play out. Yes. So I have been detained. I have never actually had to present my get out of jail free letter during a pen testing engagement. Um, but I have been questioned, if that makes sense. So they haven't scrutinized my toolkit. I'm sure it would be a little interesting to try to justify some of the things that I have. It is sort of interesting to fly with that stuff from time to time. I think TSA is more scary than local law enforcement. But typically I can show a business card and like a Google search and they'll believe me as far as why I'm there and what I'm doing. Just scrolling here to see if there's any outstanding or open concerns. But other than that, I would love to stay in touch with anyone and feel free to reach out in the future. Thanks so much for joining today, and I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you.